Studying, goes over Delia Toma, numbering sound Leane.
So today, I would like to offer you all my greetings and wishes that you are well. So now it's been almost 2 years, and that we are be able to resume these Marangok summer teachings or lessons. And so this is the main topic of the Marangok teachings is the origins of the secret mantra. So, when we talk about the origins of the secret mantra, this is the name that we've given it, but of course, but in actuality, what we're speaking about is like the complete history of Buddhism, the foundation vehicle, Mount Mahayana vehicle, and secret mantra vehicle. So this is what I've been trying to teach about. So generally, when we talk about the history of Buddhism and complete Buddhism in terms of the foundation vehicle, Mahayana, and secret mantra Vajrayana, it's very important for us to know it because we're all followers of Buddhism. We think of ourselves as being Buddhist. So this is like our idea, our position. And so it's very important for us to learn what our origins are. There's an ancient Tibetan saying, a person who doesn't know their lineage is like a monkey in the forest, the proverb goes. One who doesn't know their family history is like a fake turquoise dragon. One who doesn't know the great deeds of their ancestors is like a lost child from the moon region. This is the proverb, the Tibetan proverb. So in particular, if we don't know the life story of our own origins, then it's to understand where we come from. There's a danger that we won't understand completely where we were. In particular, if we don't know the story and the deeds of the Buddha well, then it's difficult for us to understand who the Buddha was. Likewise, if we don't know about the councils, the first council, the second council, and so forth, and how the councils were held and the schools developed, then we won't understand properly or clearly how the Dharma spread and developed. If we don't understand how the 18 schools developed and how the Mahayana spread, then it'll be difficult for us to be able to distinguish between the Mahayana and the foundation vehicles. We won't really know what the foundation vehicle is and what the Mahayana is. And if we don't understand the origins of Mahayana and foundation vehicles, it's hard to know what the Vajrayana is. And in particular, since there are disputes about whether the Vajrayana is the Buddha's teaching or not, in order to be able to cut through any such doubts about whether Vajrayana is Buddhism, we need to first understand what the Buddhism. And only then can we really be able to understand whether the Vajrayana is the Buddha's teaching or not. Likewise, if we don't understand what the origins of the foundation of Mahayana vehicles are, we won't understand what the special characteristics of the Vajrayana are. And so it's like there's a tantra, this Union of the Sun and the Moon, in which it says, if the history is not explained in detail, there's a risk of not believing in this great secret teaching. And so before we understand the secret Vajra, learn the secret Vajra, we need to have the understanding of the history. And there's a tradition of doing this. And if we don't know that, if we don't go through the history, then there is the danger that we will doubt or not believe the secret mantra teachings. And so in order that we don't have that fall, we need there's a tradition of studying history. And in particular, now we've entered the information age. So it's different than it used to be. It's like all of the internal, external instruments just come to us like like a blizzard of information. And if in that time, if we need to know what our traditional explanations and our traditional history are, so not only that, do we need our traditional explanations, our traditional histories, we also need to understand modern approaches to history and ways of thinking it. There's just no choice for us to know it. It's like it's indispensable for us to know this. If we do not know the way things are done these days and the way scholars these days perform research, if we ignore these and we consider them unimportant, then there's the risk that we will be labeled as backward and closed-minded. And it's a danger that this label will be plastered on us in that way. So in general, in Tibetan society today, there are a lot of people who favor new ideas and new views and who welcome new thoughts. There are more and more people who do this. And from one perspective, this is a good sign. It shows that we're heading in a direction of progress, so I think it's good. But many of these people with modern ways of thinking, the modern views, many among them seem to have very, very strong opinions, very, very strong memories, and but they have their own opinions, but very few of them actually engage in research and discussion with the impartiality, the evidence-based approach, and the meticulous research and discussion that modern researchers have. So that's the feeling that I have sometimes. In particular, we Tibetans and our culture and our ethnicity and language are all facing various pressures from inside and out. Because we're under that pressure, we need to cherish and preserve our traditional culture and language in a way that's different than other, in a special, unique way. We shouldn't think of traditional language or digital culture. We shouldn't think as like being like garbage and so being backwards and useless. If we destroy our own culture, that sort of acting would be a way of like erasing our own people and our own ethnicity from this planet. And so I don't see that way of doing it as good. And not only do I not see it as good, I think it'd be the list of people who have brought a disgrace on our teachings, who have destroyed the teachings. And so there's a danger that we might end up in that list. And so in any case, the danger that we would be seen as a traitor. So from one perspective, the traditional culture and language and methods are something that we need to consider important, that we need to support, that we need to consider them significant. We need to treasure them in a different way than we have before. And so this is the time that we have come to now. Now, at the same time of that, we also, for our own part, we need to follow modern methods, whether we are researching history or studying the philosophical texts. It's like a new tool or like a new way of learning. And so it's important for us to also pay attention to them. I think that this is very important for us. Now, next, before we begin the actual teachings on of the summer teaching, I think we need to review what we've been through in the summer teachings from the past 2 years. And so the first year of the summer teachings was in 2021. And during that teachings, we initially discussed the history of Indian philosophy. And so what this included were teachings on the Vedas and the situation of the Vedic periods. We talked about the Brahmanical religions and Brahmanical traditions, and we spoke about these in brief. And then following that, we spoke about the birth, the awakening, the turning the Dharma wheel and passing to Nirvana, the Buddha Shakyamuni. And so we spoke a bit about the activities of the Buddha. And then in the second year of the summer teachings in 2022, we spoke about the situation after the Buddha's parinirvana. And so among what we spoke about were the establishment of the Sangha, so how the original Sangha was formed, about how the monastic discipline was first made, and the development of monasteries, how the monastic rules and forms, how they originated. So I gave you a brief explanation or brief introduction to all these. And then we discussed how after the Buddha's parinirvana, there was the first Buddhist council. So we discussed this, we spoke about this first council, and what this included was like the story of how the great Maharishi Kashyapa gathered 500 arhats for the council, and in particular, we spoke about some of these stories regarding the stories and the problems or the difficulties, you could say, but in any case, there are some incidents between the two of them we spoke about. And I think that when we spoke about this, I think many people were impressed and had a great feeling from this part of the teaching. This is what I have heard. In any case, these were the topics we covered in the first 2 years of the summer teachings, and so I thought I should review them first. Now, last year we were unable to hold the summer teachings. So last year there was no summer teachings. And so for that reason, it's almost 2 years. It's been almost 2 years, and that now we're finally resuming. And we have this opportunity to hold the third year of the summer teachings. And so, just to go through the topics that we will cover in this year's teachings, I would like to show them to you all. So in terms of the topics, there are 3 main topics, and the first is early Buddhism. And within early Buddhism, there are there are 7 different subtopics. The first of these is the Sangha, the Vinaya discipline, and the formation of the monasteries. So we have already covered these topics. And then there's the topic of the first council, and we also have discussed that. So now we're on the third, the scriptures of early Buddhism. Now within this topic of the scriptures of early Buddhism, there is the early Buddhism and its dates. There is the development of the scriptures of early Buddhism, including the sutras and Vinaya, the language of the councils. And then also the third is there are points in early Buddhism that are related to the secret mantra. And so these are the subtopics of that. The fourth of the 7 topics is Buddhism after the Parinirvana. The fifth is the Second Council and the split into the different schools. The sixth is Buddhism at the time of Ashoka and the Third Council. The seventh is, if we have time, to discuss the dates of the Parinirvana. So these are the subtopics. Our first main topic, and the second main topic is the period of Nikaya Buddhism, or the period of the Buddhism, the 18 original schools. And so this is in terms of our Tibetan explanation, this is how the first schism and split in the Sangha happened, and then how it developed into the 8 different schools. And so this is the period that we can call the period of Nikayan Buddhism, or the Buddhism of the schools. Nikaya means school, as a Buddhist word for schools. And the third topic is the spread of Mahayana. So among these 3, the final 2 are the final 2 combos. So today what we will speak about is primarily the first of the, in terms of the first main topic, early Buddhism. We'll speak about the early Buddhism and its scriptures, the scriptures of early Buddhism. And so, first of all, when we say the term early Buddhism, and so this is the term that I'm using, early Buddhism. When you talk about this term, early Buddhism, and then there's a discussion of the dates, the time, the period when early Buddhism. So I'd like to speak a little bit about this. From the time that the Buddha founded Buddhism, the time that he started the Buddhist teachings, then Buddhism developed and developed and changed greatly, and there are many different changes in that. And within the stages of that, there were several different eras. And similarly, there are also many different stages of this. And first among them, we need to understand, what do we mean by the word early Buddhism or original Buddhism? Like, original means the first. That means, what is the first? What is the earliest of the early? The original or the earliest of the Buddhism. So we can talk about the original, or basically this is what we're speaking about. So when we talk about original Buddhism, we need to understand what is meant by that. And we need to understand what are the characteristics of original Buddhism, and what are the teachings of original Buddhism. So now, according to the Japanese scholar Mizuno Kogen, early Buddhism refers to the period of the initial spread of Buddhism in India. And from the time that Buddhism first spread in India, and over the courses of its stages, the teachings of each of the different periods of the Buddhist spirit had its own particular characteristics. And because of these particular characteristics at different times, we can divide it into several different eras. It's possible to divide the development of Buddhism into several different eras. So among these, because within the Buddhist teaching, there are the different features of Buddhism at that time. Because of the different particular features at each different time, we can divide Buddhism into different eras. And so how would we divide it? And so the first of them is going to be early Buddhism. So the time of early Buddhism, that's that era. The second is the Nikaya Buddhism, or the time of the school. This is the time from the first split in the Sangha happened until the 18 schools. This is the time period of that. This is what we call Nikaya Buddhism. Following that, there's the time, the spread of Mahayana. There are two different. We can also divide that into an earlier and a later and a third. For example, there's an early Mahayana period, and the early Mahayana period is basically the time when the foundation vehicle and the Mahayana coexisted. At this time, the foundation vehicle and the Mahayana had not completely separated, and there was a time when they coexisted with each other. Then there's the late Mahayana. And the late Mahayana period is the reason we call this. What happened in this is that it's a time where there are many different Mahayana schools. And at that time, there was in the foundation vehicle, there's a time of the Nikaya Buddhism with the 18 schools and many different schools. In the late Mahayana period, there were also many different schools that developed, the mind only and the middle way school and so forth. And so the late Mahayana is the period when there are many different excuse me, this is the middle Mahayana period is when there are the many different Mahayana schools. And then there was late Mahayana, when within Mahayana there was the secret mantra Vajrayana Chichita began to spread. So that is called the late Mahayana period. So we have the early Mahayana period of the coexistent foundation of Mahayana, the mid Mahayana period, and the late Mahayana period. And so in this way, when we think about the spread of the Buddha's teachings, it's in each different era. The Buddhist teachings of that time had particular features, and because of taking those big teachers as a reason to make distinctions between the different eras of Buddhism, and so this is a reasonable way to do it. Is what the Japanese scholar Kogen says. So the very earliest Buddhist religion, is what we call earlier original Buddhism. And this should be understood as this era of Buddhism, when he says it's called the earliest of Buddhist religion, is that it is should be understood as the period from the time when our teacher, the Buddha Shakyamuni, founded Buddhism, or to say another way, is began teaching and spreading the Dharma. As from the time that he began the activity or the deed of teaching the Dharma to others until the point about 100 or 200 years after the Buddha's parinirvana, when the first split into the different Buddhist schools occurred. Alternately, you can talk about this being from the time that the Buddha taught the Dharma. So this is the time when the Buddha was alive, and then until after the Buddha passed in parinirvana, until the earliest split in Buddhist schools, it's that period of about 200 or 300 years. And so that period is what we can call early Buddhism. And in particular, you can say it refers to the period of the time from the time of the Buddha until the reign of King Ashoka. And so this can be called early Buddhism or original Buddhism. This is okay it is reasonable to call it that. The question, when you ask when was Ashoka, there are many periods. According to the oral histories from Sri Lanka, King Ashoka was born over 200 years after the Buddha's parinirvana. And so this is the explanation, one explanation. And so according to that, this early Buddhist period lasted for over 200 years. Now, according to the northern Buddhist traditions, and this primarily means, as the traditions in Buddha were then translated from Sanskrit into Chinese, and this is what we call the northern Buddhist tradition. So, according to the histories of these northern Buddhist traditions, King Ashoka was born about 100 years after the Buddha's parinirvana. And if you take that as the basis, then the era of early Buddhism lasted for somewhere over 150 years. So this is another way you can explain it. So now, at this point, when we're speaking about what the characteristics of early non-Buddhism were, what its nature, what it was intended to do. So this is what we're speaking about, and for that reason, it's in terms of how many years it lasted, whether it lasted 100 years, or whether it lasted over 250 years, or whether it lasted over 100 years. And for the time being, we don't need to speak about this. As I mentioned before, if we have the opportunity to discuss the date of the Buddha's parinirvana, if we have the time to do that, then we can understand whether Ashoka appeared 100 years after the Buddha or whether he appeared 200 years after the Buddha. Then we could discuss this issue in detail. So in brief, from the time when the Buddha Shakyamuni began to spread the teachings of Buddhism until the period before the split of the early schools, this is what we can call early Buddhism. It's okay to call it this, and the reason for this is that during that time period, the general way that things were done in early Buddhism, could say the way things were done or the teachings of these were basically, there was not a whole lot of change in them during that time. It was basically very consistent during that time. And so for this reason, we call this period early Buddhism. And so there's good reason to call this period by the term early Buddhism. So that is talking about it in general terms. But among academic circles, there are they divide this into two different parts. And so they divide this early Buddhism into two different parts. And so there are people who do make this distinction. And so they divide early Buddhism, the early Buddhist area, into two different parts. And what these two parts are is that the first is the period when the Buddha Shakyamuni and his direct disciples were alive. This Buddhism is called original Buddhism or primitive Buddhism, the basic Buddhism, because whether it's the time the Buddha was alive or the time when, even though the Buddha was not present, his actual disciples were there. So that time is called the basic or the original or the foundational period of Buddhism. The second section is that the time when the Buddha was no longer present, and the Buddha's direct disciples were also no longer there. So there's this period from that period until the early Buddhist, until the schools developed. And so this is going to be called the narrow sense early Buddhism. And the reason why this, when we say the early Buddhism, we talk about it in a general way. We can talk about the time that the Buddha taught the Dharma until the Buddhism split into different schools. We can talk about the early Buddhism school if we talk about it in a broader sense. But if you talk about it in a narrow sense, when the Buddha was no longer alive and his disciples are no longer alive, from that time on until the split into different sects occurred, then we can call about this the narrow sense early Buddhism. This is what some scholars say. And the reason for describing it in this way is that the Buddhism, during the time that the Buddha Shakyamuni was alive and his direct disciples were alive, this was Buddhism as really flawless. It was distinct, it was unmistaken. The Dharma that's unmistaken is the Dharma that the Buddha taught. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to say that the Shakyamuni Buddha was a founder. There'd be no reason to say that there's any original Buddhism. So this is the time when the Buddha was alive. Likewise, when the Buddha's disciples were explaining the Buddha's intentions and his thought, this is also still like the foundation or the root of the Buddhist teachings. And so for that reason, you can call it the foundational Buddhism or original Buddhism. It's okay. Later, after the Buddha was no longer alive, and the Buddha's disciples were no longer alive, after that, the different understandings and presentations of Buddhism changed gradually. And they gradually moved in the direction of the different schools of Buddhism, the eras of Nikaya Buddhism as it developed. So that's when that began. And it was moving in that direction. And so it started going in a slightly different direction. And so if you compare the Buddhism of that time with the original Buddhism, with the Buddhism during the time of the Buddha, the time of the Buddha's direct disciples, if we compare these two periods, there already had been a few changes. And so this is what we can call the narrow sense early Buddhism. In any case, for these reasons, within Buddhist studies, if we make a strict distinction, and we can divide early Buddhism in the broad sense to the early Buddhism there's the early Buddhism in the wider sense, in the broad sense. So basically, early Buddhism can be divided into two different stages, and the first is the original or foundational Buddhism, and the second is the narrow sense early Buddhism. So if we divide it into these two sections, then it seems like it's actually close to a historical fact. It's close to the actual situation of how they were, as what these scholars say. Now, there's really no problem with making such different distinctions in early Buddhism. We can, of course, make this distinction, but there is one difficulty that we face. When we look at the Buddhist scriptures that we currently have, we can't really understand it. It's difficult for us to distinguish what were the teachings of original Buddhism and the foundational Buddhism, and what were the teachings of the Buddhism in the narrow sense early Buddhism. Because we don't have detailed information about what were the teachings during the Buddhism and the narrow sense early Buddhism, and what were what were the details of the teachings. We aren't able to do that. Because if you look at the Buddhist scriptures that we still have, the materials that we have, the sources that we have, taking them as the basis, it's difficult to distinguish what is original Buddhism and what is the narrow sense early Buddhism. It's difficult to clearly divide them. Another reason for this is that most of the Buddhist scriptures that we have now, no matter how early they are, the earliest of them come from the time of from the Nikaya Buddhism. Most of the scriptures Buddhists that we have are from started after the period of Nikaya Buddhism. So they came from the time of the Nikaya Buddhism. So it's after the initial split in the Sangha occurred and the 18 schools developed. That it's only from then on that we have scriptures that were preserved. The only ones we have that we can read, that we can see, are still from that after that period. And as all the different schools changed the scriptures and compiled them differently, and so it's really difficult to say specifically or to reconstruct exactly specifically what the teachings of original Buddhism were. So generally, when you speak about when you talk about the early Buddhism and original Buddhism and early Buddhism is probably first described by the Japanese scholar Dr. Hakuju Ui. So it's discussed in a book called The Studies in Indian Philosophy that was published in 26. So it's in the second volume of this that he distinguishes between these different schools. And so that's just the time that it's published. But prior to that, there's a Japanese scholar named Dr. Anesaki who had referred to original Buddhism as fundamental Buddhism. And there's another Japanese scholar named Aneto Masuharu, who used a similar terminology in 1908. But most other scholars simply call that the era of original Buddhism, or they talked about foundation vehicle and Buddhism. And most of them said they didn't make these distinctions. They just called it all original Buddhism. They only used this term of early Buddhism. They didn't make a lot of distinctions. They just used this term. And so this is the custom that most scholars followed. So this is speaking about the term, the early Buddhism, and about the period of early Buddhism. So this is what we've spoken about. So now we've come to the next section, is the spread of the scriptures of original Buddhism. So when we come to this, we have to talk a little bit about the First Council. So we do need to discuss this a little bit. Now, 2 years ago, in 2022, during the summer teachings, we spoke about the Buddha's parinirvana, and how at the time when the Buddha passed into parinirvana, Mahakashyapa realized that if they ignored the Dharma that the Buddha taught and just left things alone, it was likely that teachings would be lost very quickly. And so he thought that they should collect and compile all of the Buddha's Dharma. So he had this idea, and he discussed this opinion with the Sangha, and the members of the Sangha all supported and agreed with him. And so they all went to hold the council. And where did they go to hold it? They went to Rajagriha. And at that time, when they held the council, there were 500 of the Buddha's disciples who gathered. They were all arhats. We usually say they're arhats, right? There were 500 arhats who gathered, and they compiled all the teachings that the Buddha had given during his entire life. And so what we call this is the First Council. When we say the word council, another name for another translation is a group recitation. So this word, it's either a Sanskrit or Pali word that I don't recall. But in other words, another name for the council is a group recitation. 500 got together and they all recited the Dharma that the Buddha taught them. They all gathered and they recited it all together. And because this is how it did, it's called a group recitation. That's another name that it's called by. Now, when we speak about the first council, the traditional scriptures take it as a fact that the first council occurred. But there are some researchers who do not accept, who doubt whether or not there was a first council. In any case, there are some people who say that there was no first council. But when we look at the extant scriptures of the different schools, there are clear descriptions of the first council. And so whatever the manner that the council was held in, we can't really say that. In any case, in some form, there was a council in which the teachings of the Dharma taught by the Buddha was compiled into a single collection. And so we can say that there is this collection or compilation of the Dharma. And so most researchers do accept this. But there are a few who doubt whether there was a first council, say there probably wasn't. So there are a few such people. In any case, during the time of the first council, what most researchers says during the first council, we have the three Pitakas, the three baskets. There's the Pitaka or basket of the Vinaya, the basket of the Sutras, and the basket of the Abhidharma. There are many researchers and scholars who say that the Abhidharma Pitaka was not recited, it was not compiled at that time, but the Pitaka, whether they said basket or Pitaka at that time is different, because at that point, there are some people who said that they may not have used the word Pitaka at that time. In any case, there are the Sutras and the Vinaya, or you could call it the Dharma and the Vinaya. And these were compiled at the time of the first council. And we talk about the Dharma or the Sutras. The person who recited these was primarily the Buddhist attendant, Ananda. Now, it wasn't him alone, but it's primarily him. Well, the monastic rules or Vinaya were primarily recited by the person who had the deepest understanding of the Vinaya, so which was the Venerable Upali. And on the basis of these later, at that time, they recited the Dharma and the Vinaya, and so later, then they developed later into the Sutra Pitaka and the Vinaya Pitaka. And so the basis for these was for the Sutra Pitaka and the Vinaya Pitaka that we speak about today is what these two recited at that time. When they, this is what they're based on. Now, the basket of the Abhidharma Pitaka was compiled much later than those two. Now, at that time, the Dharma and the Vinaya that recited by Ananda and Upali, in other words, the Sutras and the Vinaya, these are things that everyone had to memorize, because at that time there was no writing. The Buddha said this to me, and you remember it, you memorize it. Now, the traditional explanation is that they had the dharani of a photographic memory. They never forgot the words that they had. It's like they were recording a tape. So they had this dharani of never forgetting. And so because they had this dharani, they were able to understand everything that the Buddha said. And then they'd recite it again. It's like playing back a tape recorder. And this was like pressing the play button, and then they would say. And then in the future, that had to be preserved. They had the power of never of a perfect memory, but other people, there are various different disciples who had different levels of memory. And so in order to preserve this, in order to memorize the text, what they did is that there's some people who the most important sutras were compiled into sutras. So sutra means something that's like a compilation. It's like a summary, a concise, making it into short letters. So these are the sutras. So they made these sutras at that point. The sutra means it's a very concise text. Now, the sutras these days do not necessarily aren't necessarily short, but in the early Buddhism, they had very short, concise words covering the most important points. These are what we call the sutras, like the summaries of the teachings. And so the reason why they're called O in Tibetan or summaries in Tibetan is that they are like concise statements of the important points of the sutras. And so these are what we call the sutras, and these are what people had to memorize. What they also made what we call gatha, or verses. And because verses are easier to memorize than prose, many of the important Buddhist hymns were transposed into verse in order to make it possible for people to memorize. Because at that time, they weren't written down. And if they're not written down, and so if you need to memorize them, you need to make them easy to memorize. So you need to make them the sutras whether you made these sutras of concise statements or you made the verses, you had to do something to make them memorizable. But also at that time, it seems that within the sutras and the verses, they did add a little bit of explanation. Within us, they add a little bit of explanation. They add a little bit of explanation in the verses. And so the explanations, what they called were the nidanas, or the origin stories. They're the ones. These were the sutras and verses that had like additional material added. Later, many years later, you had the short verses and verses. You had all these. These are all of these short sutras that were the concise statements. And then there were the verses. The verses are gatha. So they're put back together. The prose and verse were put together. They're mixed with each other. Not only were they put together, they also made transitions between the two. And we have what we call in the Indian text, we see what we call transitions. And so they made longer scriptures where they put the sutras and the verses together, and they made longer explanations of the Dharma. And this has created many scriptures, and what these are called are expositions of the Dharma. So this is what we called expositions of the Dharma. And after these expositions of the Dharma would appear, then eventually there would be sutras, very long sutras. For example, like the sutras, many of the sutras that we have, they have verses, they have prose, and so many of the sutras are very, very long. They have very long, there are many words. They have a lot of the very long texts. And so these sutras were sort of basically compiled as there's like a development. But in general, when we talk about a sutra, another meaning it means like a thread. So it means a thread. The reason why it's thread is you've got a vast meaning is condensed into a few words. And the thread, the reason it's like a thread is that if we have like turquoise or coral and we want to put them all together, you can string them together. So it's like the sutra that you can string everything together. And so this means that it's a vast meaning that was condensed into just a few words. And so this is like the meaning of the word sutras, but gradually the meaning of the word sutras. So originally the meaning was that it was short and concise, a concise presentation of a vast meaning. This is what was meant by the term sutra, and then gradually this changed until a sutra became a rather long text. with a very extensive extensive topics. And so this is what later became understood by the term sutra. So that's basically that. So this is the topic of sutras. Now, they speak about it in terms of the Vinaya. The precepts were from the very beginning. Then we can like the sutras. If we talk about the Pratimoksha Sutra, we have the Pratimoksha Sutra, and then there are also the explanations. These are what are called the Vibhanga. So there's the Bhikshu Vibhanga, the Bhikshuni Vibhanga. These are the commentaries on the Pratimoksha, the list of the precepts. So these have been present from the original. And we can understand that they're found from a very early time. Is that from the time that the monastic community formed during the time of the Buddha's during the Buddha's lifetime, there was a sangha at that time. Because there was a sangha community, the sangha members, the bhikshus needed to live a lifestyle with proper discipline according to the Vinaya teachings. They had to follow the rules and procedures of the Vinaya. And in order to live that lifestyle, they had to understand the words and meaning of the precepts correctly. If you didn't understand that, there's no way you could live with a proper discipline. You wouldn't know how to live a monastic lifestyle properly. Right? They just wouldn't know. So in order to be able to live a proper monastic lifestyle, you have to know the precepts of the Vinaya. And because you need to know the precepts of the Vinaya, then it seems that the precepts of the Vinaya had to be recorded. There must have been compilations of the precepts at the time of the Buddha. So the Pratimoksha and so forth must have been compiled during the time of the Buddha to a great extent. I think this is what most researchers also say. And in particular, when the Sangha are performing the actions or the motions, they're what we call the procedures of emotion. And so these procedures of emotions, when the Sangha is performing an action, they have to perform a motion or karma. And so later there were texts called the 101 Karmas, where they gathered them all into a single text called the 101 Karmas, or 101 Motions. But from the beginning of original Buddhism, there are many different rituals of the motions, and you had to serve different ones because the Sangha had to perform its function. So everyone had to gather and they had to do things. And so in order to do their tasks, they need to have the different procedures and the different procedures for the motions. And since you have everything and it has to follow a motion and a vote, so you had to have the procedures for doing this from the very beginning. So for this reason, it seems like these collection of the 101 karmas or motions and the parimoksha and so forth, probably that these were all compiled. These are compiled and finalized by about 100 years after the Buddha's parinirvana. Most of these were settled at that point, at that time, in basic terms. Likewise, at that time, it was important to preserve the Dharma, the sutras, and the Vinaya at the time. And the method that they did this is that they actually there's a division of labor in order to do this. They give different people different responsibilities. They give people the task of preserving a different aspects. And the reason for this is from the very earliest time, there are people that who are called the upholders of the sutras. There are people who primarily studied the sutras and who memorized them. There are Vinayadhara or Vinaya experts who memorized the Vinaya and who that was their particular specialty. And then there were Dharma teachers, and there are Dharma teachers and Dharma upholders. And so they would primarily study and memorize all the sutras. So basically, at that time, there was like a division of labor at that time. It's like sort of that. It's like this form of it. Like seems like it. Some seem to studied the sutra and they memorized the sutra. Some studied the Vinaya and studied the Vinaya and all the Vinayas because it's difficult for a single person to uphold all of this. Each person was kind of this divided among different people. And so in this way, they preserved the Dharma and the Vinaya from. But it's very difficult to trace the developments and the changes that occurred between Dharma and the Vinaya at the time. The first council and the present day Sutra Pitaka and the Vinaya Pitaka. There's the Dharma and the Vinaya that were compiled during the first council, and then there's the present day Sutra Pitaka to say what are the differences? The changes happened. It's difficult to say. And the reason it's hard to say is that at the time of the first council, if it had been written down and recorded at the time of the first council, we'd be able to have something that we could see these days. We could read. Sometimes people find them and excavate them from an underground place. That's not impossible. But at that time, it wasn't written down at all. And because it wasn't written down at all, well, it's difficult to say what differences and what changes happened between the sutras and the Vinaya at the time of the first council and the sutras and Vinaya that we have today. In any case, it's clear that during the period of the first council, Ananda and Upali recited the sutras and the Vinaya that has gradually developed over the time. And by the time of the end of the era of early Buddhism, what happened was that the sutras were compiled into what we call the Sutra Pitaka, the basket of sutras, and the Vinaya is compiled into the Vinaya Pitaka, or the basket of the Vinaya. So we can say that this is like the result of the period of original Buddhism. However, somewhere around 100 years after the Buddha's parinirvana, the original Sangha committee, there was a change in early Buddhism, and what happened is that the original Sangha community developed some disagreements in this, and they split into the two parts, the Mahasangha school and the Sthavirvada school. In any case, the Sangha community split into two different schools. And because of this, the transmission of the teachings, the responsibility for transmitting the teachings, the job of translating that was also transmitted or shifted to each of the sanghas of each school. In the past, there was not different. Now, of course, there are differences. There are, of course, different Sangha communities in different regions, but there was no disagreements where they split into two different schools. But later, they divided into two different sides. And so each of these sides wanted to preserve the teachings. Not only that, then each of these schools, both the Sthavirvada school and the Mahasangha school, experienced many individual divisions. For For example, within the Mahasangika school, there are many different sub-schools, and within the Theravada, there were many different sub-schools. In the end, there were 80 different schools. And when we say schools, we say it's different philosophies. In any case, these were originally there was a single Sangha community that divided into two. Then within each of those, there are many they divided into many sub-schools, and each of them developed into the 18 schools of the foundation vehicle. The different views, you can say, it's sort of like the difference we can talk about the Sakegelu Kagyu Nyingma. Now, within each of these different schools, they had their own Sutra Pitaka, their own Vinaya Pitaka. So originally, the mother was one, and then divided into many distinct. And so and each one had different. This is our Vinaya. This is our sutras, and they divided into slight differences. And so each school added a little bit, they changed a little bit, they wrote a little more, and they probably added quite a bit. So this time when the 18 schools were these Sutra Pitaka and the Vinaya, so they then spread to other countries. For example, there are ones that were in Pali that were then, these scriptures were spread into Sri Lanka. Later, there's the Buddhism spread into China, and at that time, the scriptures of the various schools, the Sutra Pitaka and the Vinaya Pitaka, many of them were translated into Chinese. And so these developed into the texts that we have available now. So originally you had the original Sangha community, then it split into two to make the two root schools, and they split, and then each of them had many internal divisions. And as there are many internal divisions, then each of the schools had its own Vinaya and its own sutras. And then these Vinayas and sutras were spread to other countries, including Sri Lanka, and also into China. And so that's a very long period of time that this process took. It took a very long time. And because it took such a long time, there's, as I mentioned before, there are the Pitakas, the Sutras and Vinayas, not just the sutras, but also when you had like the Pitakas, you had the baskets, you had the compilation of all the sutras, which is the Pitaka, the sutras, a compilation of all the sutras, the combination of all the Vinayas, the Vinaya Pitaka. Even though these two had been compiled by the end of the early Buddhism, but the Vinaya Pitaka and Dharma Pitaka is exactly what they were. It's impossible to know their exact original form from that time. Because at the time of the sutras and the Vinaya originally did not just stay static from that time. They didn't remain unchanged. There are many different changes. What we have to say are only things that happened after all these changes had happened. So what we had at that time, and the Sutra and Vinaya Pitaka that we have now, and the original of Vinaya and Sutra Pitaka of those times are different. I think there's probably great differences between us, what researchers say. So that's what I think that's probably, as we've begun a beginning, and that's fine. We've begun because at that point, because last year I got very busy, as is unnecessary to mention. And so now, and so I just feel relieved that I've been able to begin. It's like we said, once you've begun, and then there's at least once you've begun, at least you've gone 50%. Because once you start something, it gradually keeps going. So I think it's good to leave it there today. And so tomorrow we will have no class, and then the day after we will resume.